Methodology of Humanities, Module 3, Narration and Representation, Part 2, Narrative and Identity. In the formation of our identities, stories as narratives have great significance. Narratives have got a great role in the making of ourselves. So many narratives have gone into the making of ourself. We are made up of so many narratives, we can say, or so many narratives have contributed, or narratives have, what we can say, made our minds function in such a way that we become a human being as we appear before others nowadays. And narratives have, it is only because of narratives that we exist in language and also in our earthly existence. We live only because of narratives. See, we discover a kind of a narrative to construct ourselves. If somebody asks you, who are you? Or if we ask the question ourselves, who we are, then we will think about a story of our parents, of our ancient history, our tradition, customs and conventions, which went into the making of ourselves. So in Europe, during the times of Renaissance, they rediscovered Greek civilization to establish a great tradition. Modern man requires something to boast about his ancestry. So he went back to ancient Greece, the great narratives of ancient Greece. Once upon a time, there was a great civilization in Greece. And they incorporated all those great aspects of Greek civilization into the Western tradition, or they constructed a tradition. Since it was subjectively labeled the first and best of all traditions, people thought that Greek civilization was the first and the best of all traditions of the world. Or they created a narrative in such a way that they established a truth that Greek civilization was one of the best and the first of all traditions. So they are constructing a narrative about their past. They are telling a story about their own past. They are discovering a story. They are reinventing a story. They are building up a story to say that the West has a great tradition. This is the power of narrative. എൻ്റെ ഉപ്പുപ്പാക്ക് ഒരാനയുണ്ടായിരുന്നു, Bashir would say like that. Means, I am not as simple as you see. I am greater than what you expect me to. In my appearance, I may not be that great, but my real past is there to support me and my personality, my identity. The West created an identity by constructing a story, by saying that we have a great tradition to follow, or we inherit the great tradition of Greece. So we have a rich past. So the social circumstances that govern the existence of self are to a large extent socially constructed by texts and narratives. See, our self is constructed by texts and narratives. Suppose we generally say that we are Indians. When we speak about India and Indians in generally, we think about our rich cultural past, which is a text. We don't know whether we had any such rich past. It's a cultural construct. It's a great narrative that we have invented. There were so many little cultures in India, but sidelining all those minor narratives, we have invented a major narrative to assert our identity. India had a great cultural past. For that purpose, we invented stories. In the West, it was Iliad and Odyssey. The Greek epic poet Homer, they invented Homer, rediscovered Homer, we can say, as we have rediscovered Vyasa or Valmiki in India, saying that we had great stories here, great people had lived here, and even gods were in company with men, as in the West. We can see gods intervening in the life of great men. The great epic poet Homer is the originator of European narrative. In Europe, we have their great epics, Iliad and Odyssey. And by reading these great epics, they created an identity through his two long narrative poems. In India, we have Ramayana and Mahabharata, and we construct our identity. Yeah, by regularly reading the texts, the long narrative texts. And it has gone deep into our selves. In the making of ourselves, these long narratives have got a great role. We assert our identity by associating ourselves with this rich cultural past. Commentators on oral culture found that oral narratives served a mnemonic purpose, means to memorize things. We have to put everything in verse form. We can recite it. We can quote from memory. So all those poems were not found in the form of books. Bards, poets would be walking around singing songs of Rama or Sita or the great warriors of Mahabharata, or in the West, Greek heroes. See, oral narratives has got this kind of a capacity to carry everything in our memory. Things changed with the invention of the printing press. Books began to be printed and circulated, and reading, that ability to read, was developed. And Francis Bacon, the first major English prose writer, wrote an article on reading, how to read. Reading makes a full man. If only you read, you will be a perfect man. By reading stories or narratives, you are constructing yourself. If you don't read, you will be a vacuum, a good for nothing man, because you don't have any kind of connection with the past, you won't be rich. You will be very poor. So we think that, yeah, reading can make us very strong as an individual. Our identity can be made very strong. It can be constructed strongly by reading or listening to stories or being part of a great story. We are constructing ourselves in that way. The narratives enabled an oral culture to preserve the history of a society. In those days, before the invention of the printing press, the only way to preserve the history of a society was by telling stories or singing songs, story poems. From one generation to the next generation, they would be singing songs or telling stories of their cultural past. It is through their passing of the stories that they are constructing their identity. We are not as simple as we appear now. Behind the appearance, there is a rich cultural past. The component of memory, as embodied in a narrative, made significant contributions to the formation and maintenance of self-image within people. If you can memorize your past, if you can tell who you are, who your parents were, and if you forget everything, you will be a mere human being. But if you can construct a history of your own, then you will be a great people, as embodied in a narrative and made significant contributions. In a narrative, there is a component of memory, and this made significant contribution to the formation of our image. By rememorizing, people would be constructing a great image of oneself. And for constructing one's strong image, self-image, identity, memorizing the old story is very much required. In the formation of our identity, a memorizing of the past is required. And also for maintaining the identity, we have to go every day back to our cultural past. That's why reading epics every day becomes significant, or watching television serials of our epics becomes significant. Then only we will be able to connect ourselves with the past, cultural past, to construct our identity. India is one. We have a great national epic, Ramayana or Mahabharata. So we will be united during even certain crisis, days of crisis. We are, once again going back to mediated past through television serials to see that our identity is still intact. We are very strong. We have not begun to disintegrate. It is to integrate our identity and personality that stories are constructed, circulated, and of course also consumed by people like you and me. It is like a food for sustaining our life. It is like oxygen. A narrative is closely associated with human action rather than any abstract principles. When we think about story or narrative, we won't be able to understand the significance of them in our everyday life. It's not very clear. It's an abstract idea. Narrative, what has it to do with us? What's the point of thinking deep into the complexities of narratives? But we know now that narratives are not simple phenomena. They are closely associated with our action. They are not abstract entities. Very concrete they are, while being related to self-determination and national identity. See, now we are determined that we will overcome all kinds of issues. That kind of a determination is made possible only because we have stories of the past, strong narratives of the past that tell us that we are very strong. We were very strong and are still very strong. These narratives are making ourselves withstand all kinds of crises in our life. And it has also gone into the making of a national identity. We are Indians or any other community because of certain stories or narratives. Otherwise, we would never have any kind of identity constructed. We will be scattered. We will never be able to withstand. So, stories construct a strong self. In Europe, they invented their own culture and civilization by going back to their own oral tradition, great narratives of the past. They invented Iliad and Odyssey, Homer in the 16th century. They lived before Christ. See, thousands of years ago, there was a great culture in the West, in Greece. And during the Middle Ages, they didn't have any kind of access with those great tradition. And when there was a reawakening, a renaissance in the West to construct their identity, they reinvented a great tradition. They connected themselves with the great tradition of Greece so that they can form a very strong tradition. West is not something that is constructed in the 16th century. It has its roots, even before Jesus Christ was born, the great tradition. So these kinds of things can make you very strong. A narrative can make you strong. So we nowadays construct family histories, and we would say that once upon a time we lived in great families. When we print an invitation card for inviting our friends and family for a marriage, we won't be merely giving the names of the party involved in it, the man and the woman, or the boy or the girl who are going to engage in a bond. Their parents' name will be given, great grandparents' name will be given, house names will be given. These are all narratives to say that the boy or the girl in union have a great family history. They are not people of the street. They have their own rich tradition. They are very strong. Their identity is getting constructed through even a mere wedding invitation card. Just like that, a nation will be constructing its identity through epic. In America, they don't have such a great epics. So Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn, they consider a novel as their epic. So we should have something like a novel or an epic to say that we are large. I am large, I contain multitudes. Whitman, an American poet, is asserting his identity. I am not a small lettered I. I am a capital letter I. To assert our individuality, identity, narratives help us a lot. See, in Greek epics like Iliad and Odyssey, we know the story, great battles occur, and mostly not on shores, offshore battles in the great seas of the West, in ships, battleship Potemkin, we have a film. People engage in war, not as in our Indian myths. Our Indian myths go deep into or take us go deep into forests. But Western myths or Western epics, they would take us to great seas. Means their territorial space is very less compared to the space they occupy over the seas. And it is by reading those epics that they were able to cross seas and colonize people all over the world. They were able to venture into the sea. We never do it. The only reference to crossing a sea is in Ramayana. Hanuman crossing a small narrow strip of land is there, or gap is there in between Sri Lanka and India. If it was actually the space of Ramayana. We have not crossed great seas or oceans as such, as in the West. So narratives, they invented in the 16th century, they invented a great tradition of Greece to overcome the 16th century issue. They wanted to expand, they wanted to colonize. So they wanted to invent a myth, a great tradition. And they first, through inventing the Greek culture, constructed a strong self and then started to colonize people like we. They came to India. They had the power to come to India by reading great stories of the past, of great battles they fought over the seas. So they were seafaring men. They were adventurous. They can cross seas. They were not afraid of, great oceans. They crossed it very easily. But here in India, we have a tradition of going back into the inner realms of forests. Another identity is constructed. We never conquered other worlds because of that. But we were able to go deep into our own selves, the inner forest, by reading our own national epics. For national epics, they have become national epics recently. Only when India was constructed as a nation, we invented a great tradition of Ramayana and Mahabharata. Before that, there was no such a kind of unity in the diverse narrative as well. Recently, so many scholars have spent their energy and time in finding out a kind of agreement in shaping a kind of text which has many versions. For example, Mahabharata. There are so many Mahabharatas. One book published by a firm in the North India would be different from a book published in Malayalam in Kerala. Because we are adding or deleting certain parts of those epics to suit our purpose. When Ramayana was translated into Malayalam by Eഴുത്തച്ഛൻ, he was trying to construct a different self altogether of bhakti. Eഴുത്തച്ഛൻ was not following any North Indian tradition. He was constructing a kind of new identity, Malayali identity. So Ramayana in Kerala has constructed a different identity, different from the Ramayanas available in the north, different from Eഴുത്തച്ഛൻ. We have so many Ramayanams rediscovered now to speak about different identities in Kerala itself. Even in the folklore of Kerala, there is the coexistence of so many Ramayanas. And we are reinventing those books to assert our own different identities. We have multiple identities. And it is at this juncture that once again we are going to be united with one great national epic telecast through Doordarshan. We are scattered. We have to be united. In the construction of the syllabi of our university as well, this would happen. If we have one syllabus all over India, you will be united. If Kannur University has got a separate syllabus, you will not be part of the great tradition of India. So, even a text that we study in a classroom is part of the construction of our identity. A story that we read would change our identity. It can liberate us. So reading can influence us and it can change us. It affects us. So narrative has got a great relevance in the making of our selves. We have to look into different forms of narratives and see what elements of those narratives had gone into the making of our own selves. So we have to have a re-look into the past. Whatever we have read, whatever we have inherited, those things we have to question. Plato and Aristotle, those two people, they in Greece had thought about these things, narratives. Socrates was there. Plato was a disciple of, a student of Socrates. Reasoning capacity, Socrates stood for that. We have to question. We have to challenge the established beliefs and conventions. And the only thing that we can have access with when we think about the past is stories and narratives. We have to analyze how these stories function today in our everyday life by analyzing the structure of those stories. Means the narrative. So narratology becomes very much important in the sense that the energy that we tap from our food, just like that, the identity that is formed out of reading stories are to be, or that is to be analyzed. So for healthy practices, for the mental and physical health of our society, stories and such narratives are a must. But at the same time, we cannot swallow every narrative that is given to us. We have to see whether they are good or what change those narratives would make in us. How we are constructed through such narratives. If only we are able to analyze such narratives, we can think about the identity that is formed. For example, Indian or Hindu, Kanja Elaya, says why I am not a Hindu, because Hindu is a grand narrative constructed and thrust upon us, and we are not part of it. When we go deep into the narrative structure of that concept, so many people would be going out of it. They won't have any kind of space. The major center space is occupied by people who have power, mostly upper caste men. They wield power. So we have to look into the structure of narratives, how they function in our societies, because narratives are things which are constructed, texts are constructed. A representation is not the real word that we have to use. We cannot represent anything. Every now and then we are constructing using words or paint or stone. We are making cultural artifacts. We are constructing something new by using things which are available, easily available to us. But we should never be under the impression that these things are very innocent things. These things would go into the making of a great tradition. A mere painting, river mouth painting, for example, constructed a great tradition. Kerala men and women should be like this. The narrative of the paintings of Ravivarma would tell that we lived like this some 100 years ago in Kerala. And we will be trapped in that kind of a construction of identity. Malayali woman would put on the dress like this, or they would be inside their homes. They would be always very sad. They will never venture out. Here comes Papa. In that painting, we see a kind of construction. It's a text, it's a narrative. It has constructed a national identity. So we have to think about narrative and identity in these ways. So we will begin from Aristotle, or even before that, Plato is there, Socrates is there in the West. In the East also we have so many such thinkers, but as part of this particular methodology course, we will be thinking about Western tradition, narratology and Western tradition, a kind of the modes of universal human communication were developed by printing and circulating books, and Bible was the first book that was printed and circulated. And of course, Homer, his Iliad and Odyssey were printed and circulated. And the epic and the religious text of Bible, they are fundamentals of the Western tradition of narratives. The epicenter, the starting point of such a tradition, concerns itself with character, identity, signs, appearances, reality, space, time, and consciousness. The Western mind is constructed by the printing of the texts like Bible and the epics of Homer. So it is through these narratives that the West had constructed their identity.